Welcome back, 365 Sports. Paul Catalina, Kenneth Davis, Big Ten Country with me here as he is every week. This week on a Thursday. So if you're not a Thursday viewer and you're a Friday viewer, although I can't imagine why you would do such a thing, but if you are, you've never gotten to see Kenneth unless you go to his individual video that we put on the site. Big Ten this week, I would say it was an overall good week with the CFP and everything. I think this might be where you and I finally diverge in the wood, Kenneth. My opinion about Penn State is very low right now because of the Ohio State loss, the constant loss. It's not even just this one. It is when you look at the CFP ratings, a lot of teams get a little bit of a bump because of their history. For example, your Alabama Crimson Tide that you love so much are 11th. I don't think that they should be there. I do think that they're probably going to wind up in this thing at the end, and that will be because they've earned it, because if they come back from what they have and they're 10-2, like that's probably a great reason given their schedule to put them in there. But right now, I don't think that's happened. Penn State, I know they only have one loss, but to be ranked ahead of some of the teams that they're ranked ahead of, to me, is kind of silly. If you're going to bake in history into this, which I don't think the committee can help themselves doing because we're all human, then why is Penn State's history against teams that are ranked higher than them not taken into account? Because this is not just a recent thing. This is a decade-long problem.
Wow, welcome, and thanks for kicking me when I was down. My guts are sore.
I'm sorry, buddy. I'm sorry.
No, because look, last week, and I have to take the L's that I came on here and prognosticated. You got to own it. You can't. I was wrong. I said I was going with my heart, and I said if Drew Howler was healthy and Drew Howler was healthy enough, it was a battle of two coaches that really haven't gotten it done when it comes to top 5 matchups, and that history is worse when you're looking at James Franklin and the duration that he has been at Penn State. And this was at home, and being someone that it was a chance that they can win that game. But even if you look at it, there were turnovers that by Ohio State that kept them in the game. Mm-hmm. So it's actually even worse than the 20-13. I am openly, unabashedly the president of the Drew Howler fan club, but everything you said is right. And I mean, you got to, when you're looking at where Penn State is ranked, it's more of what you said as far as who haven't they beaten when they're in this position. Like we can go to last year before the schedule kicked up and they faced Ohio State and Michigan last year, and it seemed like they were kind of riding high. But also, who have they beaten this year when the chips were really on the deck? So I can't cover for Penn State. I think I still believe in ways that the victory was more important. And I guess the rankings kind of tell you that too for Ryan Day and Ohio State. But James Franklin has been getting a pass. And at some point, the rubber has to meet the road. I guess this is the question I asked myself. What are real expectations for Penn State? And this is just Ken in his head of Ken and thinking, because this is some of the things that the questions I used to have for Michigan when we were talking about jettison Jim Harbaugh before this run that he had the last years prior to leaving back to go to the NFL, right? Mm-hmm. And James Franklin has been there about the same amount of time. And I don't, in some places, and I know this would be heresy in the state of Pennsylvania, look at the program as Penn State is what Michigan has been in the history, even though they're both really two storied schools. When, a lot of times nowadays people don't know the schools of the history of Penn State under Joe Paterno and Michigan under Bo. But yeah, Penn State shouldn't be ranked as high. And being someone that's a fan of theirs, I think we're going to get more chances perhaps to prove that they shouldn't be ranked as high, as it looks like they're going to fall into the playoffs. And if they do, chances are they're probably going to have their lunch handed to them. James Franklin just hasn't gotten it done. The offense was stymied at times last week. Defense still played well, and I've been on here and I've kind of gotten on Tom Allen at times. Defense played well against a talented Ohio State team, but at home at Beaver Stadium in Happy Valley, this was the game, and it was bad. This was bad business for anybody that roots for Penn State. So I'll take the kicks. You know, me and you are buddies, and you can't be buddies if you can't talk trash to each other. Then that means you're really not being buddies. But you're right when you're saying, I'm not just saying that because I'm here. I'm saying it because it's just facts. And I hate to say it. It brings me no pleasure saying this about Penn State. And I mean, there's a lot of stuff when you're looking at just how everything went bad at Penn State. And I'm not even trying to come over here and think about those bad times, but I think about my childhood and looking at Joe Pyle on the sideline with the little black shoes, times he was standing too close and just enjoying LeVar Arrington, just enjoying Penn State football. And it really hasn't been the same in a long time. And it feels like that's kind of the way it's going to continue trending unless they do something in the next season or two to kind of get over this, where they can never beat the top teams in the Big Ten, in Ohio State and Michigan, and now looking like what's going to be Oregon is one of those schools that's the blue blood of the Big Ten moving forward.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Ohio State has a 1-point loss to Oregon. They got a scare against Nebraska, which everybody gets a scare. I think that's one thing that people are really bad at looking at. Like when you look at teams holistically, they'll pick a team that they have an agenda against and be like, well, they almost lost here and they almost lost there. And we're like, look, buddy, I could probably go to outside of Georgia, 2 and 3 years ago, I can go and tell you every team that's good has a scare. They have one. It's you're not going to be a juggernaut 12 times in a row. You're just not. Now, the great teams, when they're not a juggernaut, can still wake up when it matters and win a game and go home and go, okay, we got to play better next week. But Ohio State maybe appears to me to be turning a corner, but the same things I feel about James Franklin are true in a much smaller aggregate against Ryan Day. He just got a big win. That was important, but still a losing record. Do you feel – I watch him, and I can kind of see the tremendous pressure he is under to deliver what Ohio State fans have been missing since Urban Meyer left. And I wonder if he'll be a little bit of a different coach if he does get over that hump, where he won't be so cagey and all that. Because you can see it, right? You can see the way he reacts to things. It's look, he hears it from every single person in Columbus.
Yeah, I think one of the things that we talked a lot, James and myself, during the time on Big Ten Country was just, as you said, cagey, but also conservative. A lot of the times with the losses against Michigan, it was, dude, you have all the horses. And of course, Michigan, and I'm talking about Jim Harbaugh's Michigan, was built from the inside out. So it can slow down that offense and it can keep you off of the field with what they could do running the football. And we've talked about ad nauseum J.J. McCarthy and his third down efficiency. But still, you had better horses for the most part. Maybe not last year, but years prior. And I could argue even last year when you talk about skill positions and you have Emeka and Marvin Harrison Jr. on the outside, that there were times, and that defensive line, and how many of those guys even came back this year. I'll say this, though, to a point. I'm not trying to bring Penn State back into this. I don't look at Penn State as being on the level as Ohio State and Michigan and now Oregon. And I've said this to you on the show when I first started coming on, that sometimes I chastise Ohio State fans for not speaking with their chest out, because you are that school in the Big Ten, which has traditionally been the Big Ten. And you mentioned the key reason, and you give props to Jim Tressel, but Urban Meyer made Ohio State a beast, like a national beast, where they could win a national championship, but they didn't have the dogs that they have now from being able to recruit around the country in the fashion that they've been able to recruit around the country. So for me, Ohio State should be bragging and talking trash. And with the talent that Ryan Day has been able to continue to amass at that university, Penn State shouldn't really have had, I won't say they shouldn't have had a chance because Penn State is better than that, but they should have definitely been favored regardless if they was going in to be their stadium or not. And I'm saying that to get back to your point of, will a win give him that feeling of I made it? Or for us old schoolers who were around in 1995 when Steve Young finally won a Super Bowl for the San Francisco 49ers. And after the Super Bowl, he was like, can somebody please take this monkey off my back, because the shadow of Joe Montana had towered over him for so long. I don't know if Ryan Day will do that, because I don't know if this is a part of who Ryan Day is as a head coach, Paul, to really answer your question. He just may be this guy in some ways that kind of gets in his own way to me in some ways, where, again, and I get sometimes, of course, when the game is at hand, there's no reason for you to turn the ball over and perhaps risk losing the game. So I'm not saying it should be old school college football where you wanted blowouts to make sure the committee would rank you higher from the AP or the coaches or whatever. I get that, but this is a different day. But there are just times when you're talking about what he has, I feel that he underutilized. And I don't know if that'll stop just by, for instance, winning a national title. Perhaps it will. I will have to see afterwards, would he kind of turn over a new leaf and kind of relax and enjoy the spoils of, hopefully the spoils of what that university could do under him, and the amount of great talent that they continue through the transfer portal and through recruiting bringing into Ohio State.
Yeah, look, and and this is a bias, obviously, but I grade everything on the Bobby Bowden standard, right? Because that's the coach when I was in college. And he just, when I look at this every day, and I understand the pressures are probably even higher than when he was coaching, because of just, we're not talking about billions of dollars that are involved in this and big high-level financial decisions. But I never got from him. I never got from Steve Spurrier, honestly. Like, there were the coaches of that era that knew that, like, all right, look, this season's over, the next one's on here. I make the money, so I have to take this, right? James Franklin has a little bit of a problem with that. We saw last week where he bubbled over to fan. Ryan Day has a huge problem with it. And I do think that, like, more Pete Carroll was like that a little bit. And then at the end, it got a little, dicey when they started talking about NCAA sanctions. But, the best coaches are the ones that are, when they get criticism from people who aren't, experts, are like, okay, well, that's your opinion, but, I get paid a lot to do this, so I have to eat some of that, but I can move on. Ryan Day has definitely not mastered that skill.
But you know what? Okay, let's just use the example of the guys that you just mentioned here. You mentioned the old ball coach and Spurrier, and I'm with you. I will forever love Bobby Bowden. Because Florida State was that school when I was a young person, just the uniforms and everything, the movie, the program, whatever.
Yeah.
And I'm not even just saying that because we're cool or whatever. But the thing was also, they had established themselves. And like, this is also me. I'm not saying this is fact. This is just my opinion. All right. I'm not a psychiatrist or anything like that. Ryan Day, to a degree, is still quasi living in a house that Urban Meyer built. And he hasn't changed the paint and altered it enough to where you're like, yeah, that's Ryan Day's house. It's still like, that's Urban Meyer's crib. And I don't know if he will change that, but I think if winning a national title, it's easier to let the water run down your back, as you're mentioning those guys. Like the people that you mentioned, they basically left. It was like, okay, even at the end, it was time for them to go. It was like, okay, time has kind of passed you to a degree. And we know, Spurrier went on to South Carolina or whatever. And Bobby Bowden was just getting up there in years. It was time for Bobby Bowden to go ahead to his next phase in life. But they were the institution. Like, that's like that. And I don't know how many coaches. Of course, you have Alabama. Nick Saban became the institution in a house that Bear Bryant built. Who would have ever expected that? You know what I'm saying? But winning gives you that arrogance in a way, to that or laissez-faire attitude was like, whatever, I don't have to worry about what you're saying, because look at the results of what I've proven. And with the weapons that Ryan Day has had, and partially due to Jim Harbaugh at the time being in Michigan, it's kind of buffed him. And of course, you got the situation where Kirby snuck out of there with a victory. Like that was Ryan Day's right there with CJ Stroud. And Georgia got out. They got out of that one where I don't think anybody had Ohio State playing to the level that they played in that playoff game against Georgia. And that was the one perhaps that Ryan Day needed, to where he can kind of, if he will, relax again. I have to see it happen to know if that's in his character. He may just be wired like this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. You're right. All right, a couple of things like this week. I didn't want to talk about a lot of the games because again, there's not a lot of like season affecting games here. But I'm curious about Indiana and Michigan. I feel bad for Indiana that this was their first chance to. If you look at the schedule, when they looked a couple months ago and felt they might be pretty good, this is a first chance to prove, like, hey, we can go toe-to-toe with the big boy, and the big boy doesn't have a quarterback. Like, they have literally 21 other positions pretty well filled out at the 2 deep, but the quarterback it's even – Garrett is an LSU fan, and he lived this for years with Les Miles and –
misery.
Yeah, of 21 other positions. Actually, let's say 23. Oof. Kicker and punter were always good. They had NFL kickers and punters. But the quarterback was just bad. Michigan is living that right now. And so because of that, they're just not really that viable. They can still run the ball. I do feel bad that Indiana won't get to, like, chalk this up in the corner of, like, hey, we just beat Michigan. But I still think it's a game that'll be interesting to watch because it will be them taking this offense against what is still a really good defense.
Really good defense, really good special teams. You mentioned that they can run the ball. I think next year I will have the sentiment that you just said, and that's of course thinking that this isn't going to be a one and done. This is what Kurt Cignetti is going to continue to do at Indiana. But I think flipping this season the way that they flipped this season and being undefeated, I'll take Michigan being kind of down right now. Where we're trying to steal us one. Let's just be honest. And it's not a total thievery where usually like Alabama has done that, where it was like, yeah, Alabama's rebuilding, quasi reloading this year, and the Bryce Young, we stole that one. Like we weren't kind of supposed to win that one, but it was like snatch, we got it, we out, right?
Yeah.
And that's what I mean when I say stealing, where you're not early on the odds-on favorite, but you end up having a significant season or actually winning the national championship. I'm not saying Indiana will win the national championship, but they definitely have a chance to be in the running. And we've talked about in the past of them being out of the top 10 and now looking at the CFP being open and them being right smack in the middle of it. If I'm them, I don't even want Michigan to have a quasi JJ McCarthy light, because one, any loss because of who you are could be and will be held against you in the court of college football law. Mm-hmm. And this right here allows you to go ahead, whoop them, do what you need to do. There's no doubt in any of us that Indiana, with the amount of points that they've been able to amass, is going to probably beat Michigan. And yes, Michigan is slightly down, but Indiana's been down forever. So go ahead. I don't think Indiana's at a spot where it's like, oh yeah, I'm ready to take on the big boys mano a mano. You may feel like that, but you don't need that just yet. Go ahead and have this year be as surprising as it can be, and have the results be as momentous as they can be before you're really like, yeah, Oregon, yeah, Ohio State, I really want that smoke consistently. You know what I'm saying? Like, and again, perhaps they could do that. I don't know. I have to see it. This is the Hoosiers. Don't cut out Kirk. I'll give him his props. But for me, it's cool because also, and I like the fact that you put it from the Indiana perspective and not the Michigan perspective, because they won a national title. Get out of here. You won one. You're good. So I like that. But it reminds me quickly, and I don't want to just jump off, but it reminds me when the White Sox won the World Series. And I love the fact that the only team really in the AL that we didn't have to face to get to the World Series really was the Yankees, and I wanted that Yankee smoke. Yeah. Right, because at least we faced Boston, and that was like the only time it looked like we was going to win one. And El Duque came in and saved a game that looked like it was going to be a blowout. But the reason I birthed it up, it felt good for me to say, all right, we didn't face the Yankees, but we faced everyone that's pretty much really good in the AL. So you can't talk crazy. But I'll be honest with you, if they didn't face anybody and there were a bunch of just lemons lying around that we had to go through to beat Houston, I still would have enjoyed that World Series. And that's kind of what I'm saying as far as Indiana. It sounds good, but just get the victory and get out the way, basically, because you're playing with the house's money this season, and it may be deservingly so. We don't know that, but you're still playing with the house's money for someone looking in on the outside looking in.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that, look, I think they're going to wind up in the playoffs. I really do. I think there's not much. I mean, they win this week, beat Ohio State, they might wind up in the or lose to Ohio State. They still might wind up in the championship game. We don't know what's going to happen. But if you were to talk about a one-loss Big Ten team that deserves to me to be in the playoff over Penn State, it would certainly be Indiana, because I think they've got it better off than Penn State.
I agree. I as the Penn State backer, I agree.
Yeah.
I agree. If being fair is fair. And with expectations going to Penn State, expectations being deflated, and again, Indiana not just playing with house money, but laying big dollars down. I mean, they're whooping on people. So I agree with you totally.
Yeah. All right, Kenneth. A couple more things, real quick, rapid fire. Iowa's offense. Tim Lester, has he really done something here? And if they can find a halfway decent quarterback going into next year, does Iowa maybe have something to build on where they could be a playoff team? I don't think they're quite that good on offense, but I mean, they're scoring some points now all of a sudden, where you look up and they've got 38, 40 points in a game.
It's not a question. When you're talking about consistency and you talk about special teams, you talk about defense, Iowa's going to show up any given Saturday, Friday night, whatever, they're going to show up. And we talked about this on here. Only person that I will say consistently is better, early Nick Saban and Kirby doing Kirby, right? Mm-hmm. But that defense in Iowa travels along with that run game. There is no question, to your point. If they got a quarterback that was multifaceted, it'd be scary, to be honest. If they have a guy that can he doesn't have to be automatically be able to score with his legs, but to be able to extend plays and threaten defenses out on the edge. It's going to improve that running game, because now you're going to have to worry about whoever's at running back in the future. Let's say if it's Sands, Caleb Johnson, but then it also opens up more play. Also, we're talking about tight end too when we're talking about Iowa.
Yeah.
So if you add to them a quarterback with a safety blanket at a tight end, we know the run game's coming, and you can get in decent receivers on the edge. It can be a threat, because you don't want to travel up to Iowa during the wintertime and get into a fist fight. And that's basically what you're going to get into when Iowa shows up and they're able to score 30 points. And I mean, the last few games has been 40 points or more. If they can put up consistently 30 to 35 points, that's a hard out. And that's something they haven't been able to do till right now. It looks like that's what Tim Lester has been able to accomplish with that offense in Iowa.
And how legitimate is Minnesota?
I don't know. To be honest with you, it's funny too, because when one of the conversations, a lot of times, of course, I'm out of Illinois, everybody, our state school is U of I. Mm-hmm. And when I talk to Brett Bielema or reporters for U of I, one of the things that we've looked at is being kind of like Minnesota. So even when you kind of look at that loss, and Brett Bielema had been kicking the Golden Gophers, for 10 straight victories, he finally got his first L. PJ Fleck, last year, it wasn't the season that we expected from the Golden Gophers, and the defense wasn't terrible. It was good, but it just wasn't to the level that it's been in the past. They've been able. Max Brosmer is straight. His completion still isn't where necessarily you want it to do. I mean, it depends on what's your definition of real. Because there's been a lot of talk about PJ Fleck. There was a talk about him leaving to go to the West Coast, and behind the scenes, a lot of us have discussed, should he have gotten out while the getting was good? Because the bloom is starting to fall off that rose as being one of those guys that schools have to get for their program. And so I would put it more that perhaps PJ Fleck is still keeping his name out there as one of the coaches, the up and coming program changers. Because I think that was kind of slide, but being real, no, not at this point. They have to get back to being consistent like they were before last year. This season, it's an improvement from last year, but there's still, and I know they've been on a winning streak now for 4 games. It's still got some of the smell from last season.
Okay,
they have to fumigate and get back on the track where it looked like when he first got there, for me to say Minnesota is really real.
Yeah, I get you there. Kenneth Davis, Big Ten Country, with us here on 365 Sports. New best friend in the whole world. Like one day, me and the wife are coming to Chicago, and we're gonna rock it. I'm telling you, she's a native. She was born there. So I told her, I was like, hey, we got to get up to Chicago. I've got this new – she watched the segment. She's like, okay, I'm down. Like, let's go to Chicago. So it will not be during the winter months, Kenneth. I'll tell you that.
No. Don't do that. Don't do that.
Yeah.
She knows and you know. You both know.
Look, if you ever see me in Chicago in December, January, February, I'm on the run. Like, someone is chasing me.
I got you. In case that happens, I got a couple spots.
On the run.
I got a couple spots where they're not gonna find you. There's a couple of spots that I can hide you. I can send you. They're not gonna look for you.
Good deal, my friend. We'll talk to you next week.
Later.
That's Kenneth Davis, Big Ten Country. Josh Neighbors, he's up next. This is 365 Sports.